We will just start now, and for anyone else who's coming in, I will kind of repeat myself a little bit so that people can feel familiar and get to learning, because this is a learning experience. You can see my little pop up on the screen. That's just helpful as well. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is introduce the festival and introduce who I am. So I'm Antonia. Nice to meet you. I am the Outreach and Campaigns Coordinator for the 3 Million, focusing on the Young Europeans Network. And I am running the festival this week, which is super exciting. For those of you who attended the previous events, I'm sure you're very familiar with my face. Hello. For those of you who are new, welcome. What we're doing with the EU Citizens Festival is we are trying to raise awareness that EU citizens can vote in local elections this year, and we're trying to encourage them to get out to vote. We're focusing on people aged 18 to 30, but we're also wanting everybody of all ages and all nationalities to join and to learn and to engage and be able to go out and vote. Before we start, just a reminder that the registration deadline for local elections in England is on the 6th of May. So make sure that you get out there and get registered. Local elections are on the 6th of May. The registration deadline is this Monday. So make sure you're registered and then make sure you vote on the 6th of May. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn how to make a decision using mathematics, which is for fun. I personally hate making decisions. Anytime I have something in front of me, I would just rather crawl into bed and never look at it. But decisions are really important. We make them on a daily basis. It can be something as small as deciding what you want to have for breakfast, or something as big as, deciding who to vote for. And that's what we're going to focus on today. So yes, today we're going to look at how to make decisions using a decision matrix and figuring out who to vote for. So for example, again, the local elections are on May 6th. You have lots of different candidates, lots of promising candidates with different ideas, and it can be really overwhelming to try and decide, who you want to vote for. So we're going to teach you a tool today that will help kind of simplify the process, and it can be used for any other decision that you have in your life. So why is it important to make decisions? Like I said, we have decisions that we have to make on a daily basis. But you want to make sure that decisions that are a little bigger, like deciding who to vote for, deciding where to go to university, deciding what kind of job you want to take, it's super important that these decisions are evidence-based, that they're informed, so that you feel confident about it and so you feel assured. So on the screen you can see there's a list of different decisions, different reasons, that is needed to make a decision. So for example, making informed decisions will increase your knowledge about a certain subject. Even if you decide to, not pick a certain place, you're going to have learned a lot in the process. You have that idea of self-confidence, you feel self-assured, you feel relaxed, you're informed about your decision. You're satisfied as well, once you've made that decision, it's the right one. There's that fear of stress is just taken away. And yes, again, decrease anxiety and feelings of conflict. So once your decision is made, it's done, you don't have to worry about it. So having informed decisions and evidence-based decisions is super important, and it's really important to be able to ease that kind of stress that you might have, or that anxiety that you have about making these decisions. I see a couple of notifications, so I'm just going to check the chat. Fantastic. So everyone, remember, you can pop any questions or comments in the chat throughout, and I will be looking at them to be able to include them in the presentation. So let's start. So everybody here, if you have a piece of paper and a pen, you can get interactive, but this is basically what a decision matrix looks like. And if you have a pen and paper, I encourage you to draw it out now, and that way you can learn in the process. If you're watching on Facebook and you don't have access to a pen and paper, it's completely okay. You can take a screenshot, you can just take a look at it, and I'll talk through and you'll be able to understand. But anyone who has come here and is prepared, I do encourage you to take a piece of pen and paper, draw out this matrix, and it'll help you to just have that practical sense. So I'll give you a few minutes just to draw that out for anybody who is watching. Fantastic. And you're going to be able to see this a lot, so don't worry if I move on and you haven't finished it yet. That's completely okay. We'll be coming back to this a lot, so you'll see this image a lot and be able to draw it out if you missed anything. But I'll give you a couple of minutes just to draw it out. And I can see some participants here. I would love to see who you are and why you're here. So feel free to pop that in the chat when you finish. So yes, just give you a couple more minutes to draw that out before I move on. And then of course I'm going to explain it. So I know it looks really daunting right now and it can be kind of confusing, and that's okay. What we're going to be doing is talking through what each of these things mean and how we can use this as a practical tool in making a decision. Okay. I don't know if that was a minute or not, but I'm going to move on. And like I said, don't worry too much if you haven't had time to draw it out, because we can come back to it and you'll see it quite a bit. So this is the part where I'm going to get everybody engaged. And if you want to talk, feel free to put up your hand on Zoom and I'll bring you in. And I would love to hear, like physically hear from you. If not, I would love to, anyone watching on Facebook or anyone who's kind of shy on the Zoom, feel free to put it in the chat. But I would really, really love your feedback. This is a super interactive session. So I'm going to ask you a question. And basically, I want to hear what you have to say. So going back to this factors, this is what we're going to do first. Now, within a decision, usually there are lots of different factors that you have to choose from. You know, if we take the decision of who to vote for, there's lots of different factors that go into that. So, for example, you could say friendliness of the politician, what the politician's policies are, you know, whether they come from the same background as you and they can empathize, you know, whether or not they have been in office before and you want someone who's familiar, or perhaps you want someone who is new and fresh. Maybe, you know, if they're from a particular party that you like. Lots of different factors, you know. To make it a bit simpler, if we're comparing the same decision about, like, you know, what to have for breakfast, you could think of, you know, a factor could be how healthy you want it to be, you know, how much time do you have to cook, you know, how much time do you have to eat before you have to run out the door, whether or not you want something that is a big breakfast or a little breakfast. You know, there's lots of different factors that go into every different decision that we make. So the first thing to do when you're making a decision is to brainstorm and write down all the different factors that you can think of. So that's what we're going to do now. We are going to write 10 different factors of, you know, why you would vote for a certain person. That is our example, and that's one we're working with today. So for everybody, I would love to either hear from you, so put up your hand and call out some factors, or put them in the chat if you don't want to talk, and that's completely okay. Everyone who's watching on Facebook, please feel free to comment. We'll be able to see them as well. And yeah, so feel free to start putting them in the chat, different factors that you can think of. So for example, oh yeah, thank you, Colin. I can see you on Facebook sharing a website. Really, really helpful, definitely. But yes, think of different factors. I've given some easy ones. So for example, you know, how good is a politician at communicating? Because if they're in local politics, you're going to want to be able to email them. You want them to be able to respond to you, so you know that you're in good hands. You're going to want to pick someone who has really good policies. You know, maybe you have a particular policy in mind that you want aligned with, like environmental policies, or, you know, mental health, or things like that, that a local councillor can implement straight away. That's another good factor. So feel free. I'm just going to keep waiting here until people come in. So there's no wrong answers here. It's all completely subjective. So feel free to comment on the chat, like give me some factors that you care about within local politics. I'm watching the chat now, so feel free to come on in. I can see some people here. Still waiting on the chat. This is interactive. I want to hear from you. Oh, hold on. Okay, I see that everybody is really, really shy, and that's fine. Urena, fantastic. So we've got, ideally a candidate should have a good combination of work experience, very important. in the private, public, and third sector. It doesn't have to be paid work, volunteering, equally valuable. Fantastic points. That's a really, really good one. Thank you for coming in. I love not just being on my own. This is great. So yeah, so that is a factor in itself. So you could say work experience, or if you wanted to be really specific, you could say work experience in the public sector. And that is a factor. So basically, for the decision matrix overall, you know, if you don't want to come in, that's fine, but you need to have 10 different factors. And again, if you have your piece of paper, I want you to write them down, 10 different factors that matter to you, you know, work experience, friendliness, communication, things like that. Signing pledges, Laura, fantastic, really, really, really helpful. You know, whether or not your local candidate that you're interested in, you know, has signed or maybe voted on things in previously that you're interested in, or even if they've had work experience in something that they're interested in, whether or not they would sign a pledge to say that, hey, you know, I will support, you know, EU citizens in the future, or I will support mental health if I get elected. These pledges are a really good way of signaling what your councillors or candidates aspire to and care about. So again, practically, you want 10 different factors, write them all down and just look at your list, and then you'll be able to identify what factors are important to you. So next step, this is what we've just done. We have written down 10 features that matter to us about elected councillors. Take a look over them, think about why they matter to you, and we will move on to the next part. So the next part is prioritizing. Basically, out of these 10 that you have now listed down or thought about in your head, if you're participating on Facebook, out of these 10 factors, I want you to prioritize and select 5. So you're going to break it down into 5 different important features that are the most important to you. And I want you to prioritize them and number them out of 5. 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important. So for example, if signing pledges, like Laura brought in, is the most important to you, then you're going to number that 1. If, you know, environmental policies perhaps was the least important to you, though it should be very important to everybody, then you would number it 5. So 1 is the most important and 5 is the least. So after you've done that, I'll give you a couple of minutes for everybody to look at their list, pick 5 that is really, really helpful. 5 that you care about, 5 that are the best ones out of your 10, and number them in order, prioritize them to figure out which is the most important to you. So I'll give everybody a couple of minutes just to do that. Everybody on Facebook, feel free to put your factors in the comments as well. I would love to hear from you. And I'll give you a couple of minutes just to do that. I feel like we should have some like lo-fi jazz or something in the background. When I give this presentation in person, it's usually a lot more rowdy because people are shouting different factors out, and it's definitely a lot more engaging. But we adapt, we do what we can, we work with it. So the next thing that we have, you should have your 5 factors, again, prioritized from 1 to 5, 1 being the most important, 5 being the least. Yep, and that's what we've just done. And then we're going to put it into the decision matrix. So again, you should have had this drawn out. If you haven't had it drawn out, that's completely fine. You can draw it out now. But what basically we do within our table, our decision matrix, is we put in all the factors. Now, ignore everything else for now. We're just concentrating on the factors that we have just developed and prioritized. So for example, here you can see that I have identified policies and communication as 2 of the biggest factors that matter to me, because, you know, policies in general is very much what a candidate stands for when they are running, and then communication is really important, especially for local councillors, because you will be communicating with them on maybe not a daily basis, but whenever issues come up, you would want to make sure that they would respond quite quickly. So policies and communication are just ones that I came up with. You might have different ones. For example, the work experience is a really good one as well. And these numbers is out of, I have 4 here, but out of the 5 that you have developed, which ones are the most important? So I have factor X, it's just an example, as the most important. And then blank is 4th, which is the least important. So what I want you to do, again, forget about everything else on the table. We will come to that in a second. I want you to go through the 5 factors that you have, write them down in the table, in the decision matrix, and write down the number that you give them, assigned to them in terms of priority. So again, policies was my second most important. So I put policies and I put 2. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to do that and go through it. Oh, so I'll give you a couple of minutes just to go through that and write them all down. It shouldn't take long. And then we will go on to the solutions, which is our next step. And again, if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, either in the webinar or on Facebook, feel free to put them in the chat. I can see the chat, so we will be able to discuss that. So give you a couple minutes just to fill that in. Okay, so it shouldn't have taken too long because it's just the policies and it's just the factors and the prioritization that we are filling in. Okay, so solutions is the next part. So to any decision that you're ever going to make, you are obviously having solutions, different choices to pick between. Again, if we go back to the cereal example, it's one I like to use because it, is a very, very simplified way of looking at a decision. You could say, okay, the different options that I have for breakfast are, I could have a banana, or I could have a full fry, or I could have cereal, or I could have milk. I don't know. You can have anything really. But whatever different options you have, this is what we're going to call solutions in this decision matrix workshop. With candidates, for example, that would be your solutions. So those would be the people that you are choosing between. It could be the local candidates that you have in your district. I encourage everyone who is interested in getting out to vote to look up the candidates that are in your district, read about them, research them, see, how they align on the different things that you have identified as your factors that are important to you. Just in general, that's really, really helpful to do, but also it is required for our decision matrix today. So what you're going to do is, and it's okay if you don't have it right now and you don't know the information right now, but this is just a kind of tutorial to be able to teach you how to do this, and you can kind of take this with you and do it on May 5th, the day before the election, so you know exactly who you're going to vote for the next day. So again, in terms of solutions, our solutions would be our candidates that are running in our local district. So basically what I want you to do, and if you don't know who your candidates are as of yet, that's completely fine. You can just name them 1, 2, and 3. We can do this hypothetically, as I will be doing hypothetically. Just to teach you what this is. And once you have the knowledge of who your candidates are, you can write them down. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to write down the 3 different candidates, or 4 or 5 that you might have in the possible solutions sector. Again, ignore everything else on this matrix. I will be coming through it. All we're going to do is literally where you see possible solutions, write down the different candidates, and it doesn't matter what order you put them in, you just write them down. I can see some chat coming in. Yeah, some really, really good points put in the chat. So for example, looking at the attendance record in council meetings is a really, really good factor to bring in. That could definitely be one of our factors that we have that are important to us. Definitely. So basically what we're going to do with the potential solutions, we write down all the different candidates that are running in our area, the people that we have the choice between to vote for. And what we're going to do is we're going to assign them a score. And this score is going to be based on the factors. So for example, you can see where I have in the column score S, I have these 3 different numbers. So I have 1, 2, 3, I have 2, 1, 1, and I have 3, 3, 2. And basically what this is how well this candidate does on whatever factor I have. So for example, in the very, very first column, we have policies. That has been the factor that I identified as something that was important to me. And I said hypothetically that candidate 1, did really, really well. 1 is always the best. So 1 is the best factor and 1 is the best in terms of the rating. So if they did really, really well on the really good policies that align well with what I believe in, then I'm going to give them a 1 because they did very, very well. Think about it like, if you win a race, the person who comes first is always the winner. So that's the way to think about this. So 1 is the best. But candidate 3, for example, had maybe really bad policies, so they got a 3, which is the rating is out of 3. It could be 1, 2, or 3, depending on how good they are. So for example, we do the same thing with communication. Candidate 1 was okay with their communication, so we gave them a 2, but candidates 2 and 3 were really, really good at responding, so we gave them a 1 because they were both the best. And it doesn't matter what, it doesn't have to be like 1, 2, and 3. You could do everybody 1 if everyone's really good at a certain factor. But the whole point of this is to be able to rank your candidates or your solutions to a certain decision on whatever factor that you have. So for example, in this decision matrix, we are ranking our candidates based on our policies and our factors. So for example, we identified attendance at local council meetings, or we identified your work experience beforehand as 2 factors that were really, really important to us. So what we're going to do is look at all the different candidates that are currently running, and we are going to score them based on how good they are at that factor. And again, just remember the number 1 is the best, number 3 is the worst. So I'll give you a couple minutes to fill that in. And again, if you don't have the answers on this, I don't expect you to have researched all the candidates in full before coming to the session today. That's okay. The whole point of this is just for me to teach you how to do this so that you can go off and do this afterwards. And I do really encourage everyone to actually really research all the different factors. You can guess if you just want to have a bit of an idea, but if you want to have a really informed, evidence-based decision, then research really, really helps. So for example, looking at past attendance in council meetings shows a really good, shows kind of how good they are at communicating or how good they are at working within their district, how much they care. So that could be a good example of how research basically can help inform your decision and inform the grade, the score that you give them on each factor. So I'll give you a couple minutes to wrap your head around that. I know it's a little confusing and complex, so if anyone has any questions, either in Facebook or in the webinar, feel free to put that in the comments and I can answer any questions that might have come up. So another comment from Facebook, another if candidate party fulfilled their policy commitment promise. Fantastic, yes, that's a really, really good point. So for example, looking at how a candidate potentially has voted or has worked in the past, whether or not they fulfilled things that they had pledged or promised, whether or not they had aligned with policies in the past or whether or not they had fallen through, that's a really, really good factor to have. So, but that's also just a really good way of researching different factors that you might have. So for example, policies is one of my factors, but maybe the research that goes into that is, okay, well, not only did they say that they'll do something, did they actually do it? Not only did they say that they support mental health, but did they, allocate funding in my area to mental health? Something like that. Being able to kind of research this and make sure that your policies, make sure that your factors, I keep saying policies because that's one I care about, are super important to be able to understand how to make this informed decision. Another one we have from Facebook says that factors are important. Factors that are important are the candidate's voting record that can be found online. Definitely, that's one I've briefly mentioned, but yes, your candidates' voting records can be found online. So it's really, really good to be able to understand how they voted in the past, on what specific stance that they've had on certain policies and certain issues that you care about. You're able to kind of look at that and see, again, did they vote in the way that you would have wanted them to vote as your representative? Or, did they say that they were going to vote in a certain way and then didn't and voted another way? That's also kind of shows you their character, their loyalty, I guess, and whether or not they tell the truth, which is also really important in politics. So be able to look into that. It's always really helpful as well. Loving these comments, keep them coming through. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next part just to keep the ball rolling. So the next part is mathematics, and don't run away. I know some people get really scared when you hear mathematics. It's a scary thing, but this is super, super basic and really, really easy to do. So don't worry. So what we're going to do now that we have our factors, and again, what we've done is we have brainstormed 10 factors. We've broken them down into 5. We've listed them from 1 to 5, 1 being the most important, 5 being the least important, and we've put them into our factors row. Then what we've done is we've gotten our candidates. I have 3 hypothetical candidates here. There may be more, there may be less, but what we've done is we have scored them based on the factors that we have outlined. So for example, again, factor 1, I said policies. It was my second favorite factor, so we got a 2. My candidate 1 did really, really well on their policy, so they got 1. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the math. So we're going to multiply our priority, which is number 2 here for factor 1, and our score, which for candidate 1 is 1 because they did really good. So 2 multiplied by 1 is 2. Again, like I said, super basic math. You're just going to do that for each one. So for example, on factor 1, again, policies, it was my second favorite. So I said 2 for policies, and then candidate 2 did kind of okay, not bad, not good. So they got a 2. 2 by 2 is 4, and that's what we're going to write in here. We're just going to do the same thing for every single factor and for every single candidate. So you're literally just going to keep filling them in this column where I say rating R, and I've done that for each one. So you're going to keep doing that for each one. For anyone who's following along and actually has different scores, I encourage you to do this now. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to kind of do the mathematics. So you can use your phone, you can use your calculator if you don't want to have to sit through it, but it shouldn't ever be too much because the highest number you will ever have is maybe 5 and 3. 5 and 3 is 15, so you shouldn't be too bad. But keep going through. So basically what we're going to do is you multiply them together, S by P, basically is a really good way to remember it. And then you put that in the column and you do that for every single candidate, every single factor. So you should have something that's starting to look like this on the screen. You can see in rating R columns, they're starting to be filled out. And then what we're going to do is we are going to add up the row. Now we're only going to add the R. So forget about S, forget about P, forget about all the different ones. Your different R's is what you're going to add up. So as you can see here, I have my R1, I have R2, and I have R3. And then I have my overall. At the very, very end, we have a total column. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to add them up. So for example, here we have 2, we have 6, and we have 3. So adding 2, 6, and 3 from R1, R2, and R3 is 11, and I have 11 in the ranking totals. So basically you're just going to do that. You're going to fill it up and then calculate the totals for each. And again, don't be adding the score, you're only adding R's. So remember R1, R2, R3, and then you have your column with your totals. And that's going to be how you make your decision. So you should have 3 different totals there. I'll give people a couple of minutes just to kind of calculate that, and then I will talk through what that actually means. And again, if anyone has any comments or questions about that, feel free to put them in the chat or to comment on Facebook, and we will read them and include them. This is a very interactive session. So I'll give you a couple of minutes just to calculate that. Okay, I'm going to continue on. If you're still doing the math, that's completely okay. Just keep listening, multitask, because this is important. So what we're going to do now is, now that we have our totals, you should have, 3 or 5, depending on how many candidates you have, totals. Now this is really important. The total that is the lowest is the one that you should pick. That is your decision made, done and dusted. The reason for that is, 1 was our favorite in terms of our priorities, and 1 was our best in terms of, how good a candidate scored on your factors. So when we multiply that all together and add them up, it means the lowest one is the one that's going to be the best overall on your preferred factors. So for example, someone who does really, really well on a factor that you care about the most is going to have a really, really low score at the end, which means that the lowest score is the one that you should pick, because again, that reflects the candidate who really has the best, who's done the best on the factors, on the things that you care about. So that is, in a nutshell, how to make a decision using a decision matrix. And I know it seems really complicated and confusing, and it's like, why would I do all this math? I can just make the decision. And if you can, cool, fantastic, go for it. Go vote for the people that you care about. That is so great. But if you are like me and you struggle with decisions and you get a lot of anxiety about, I don't know who to vote for, I don't know what to do, then actually sitting down and writing them out and figuring out like why you vote and what you care about within voting and figuring out, the candidates that you have, the options that you have, who's the best at the different things that you care about, and actually having it mathematically, just scoring them, prioritizing, and then having, math basically tell you who you should vote for in the end is it's a really easy way to make a decision, and it can take the stress and anxiety out because you know that you've made an informed and research-based decision. But also you had your math do it for you. So it's definitely a really easy way to kind of make a decision. It can also be very stress-free for people who struggle with making lots of decisions. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of what it is. I'm going to kind of go through what we did in Sum so you can use this for any other decision that you might make. I've used this, I learned how to do this at Minerva, which was the undergraduate school that I went to. So if you're interested in Minerva, I will post a link about it and you can learn how to apply if you want to go to their undergraduate or graduate program. They teach a lot of this kind of stuff. So that's just a side point that I'll post later. But in Sum, basically this is how you use a decision matrix, and you can use it for any different thing. I've used decision matrix for deciding what university to go to. My factors were like the campus, the cost, the level and quality of education, things like that. You could use it for deciding what cities move to. If you are wanting to move somewhere, you could look at or neighborhood perhaps. You could look at, schools, whether they're good for kids. What's the quality of education? You could look at cost. You could look at facilities in the neighborhood. Would you be close to nature? Would you not be? When you're getting a new apartment, cost versus location versus noise levels. You could use this for, again, picking your breakfast if you really wanted to be, mathematical about it. Or what job to take, say you get multiple job offers and you're trying to decide which one you think is the best. Well, again, figuring out what factors are important to you, such as, again, salary, time commitment, whether it's in the field that you care about, anything really, and then writing down your options, figuring it out. These kind of decision matrix can be used for anything, but I really encourage them to be used for making a decision about local politics, because it can be really easy and really interesting to be able to learn more about your candidates and help you make that decision of who to vote for. So again, in Sum, this is how we do it. Step one, you brainstorm your factors. So you brainstorm all the things within your certain decision that are important to you. I usually recommend about 10, because then you've kind of done all your bases, but you haven't gone too much into it. Then 5, we select 5 out of that, half it down from 10 to 5, and we make sure that these 5 are the ones that we care about the most. And out of that 5, we prioritize, 1 being the most important and 5 being the least important, and we give them all a score. And then out of that, next we go into brainstorming solutions. And again, solutions are the different options, the choices that you have between. So that could be the different candidates that you have on a ballot. It could be the different types of breakfast cereal you have, or it could be the different career options that you have in front of you. Solutions are basically your choices. Once we have our solutions identified, we are going to move on to scoring those solutions against the factors one by one, which means, again, how good did this candidate do on their policies? How good is this breakfast cereal at being healthy for me? How good is this career in terms of career development? All these different things, all the different solutions that you have based on the factors. You give them a score, again, 1 being the best, 3 or 5 or 10, depending on how many solutions you have, being the worst. So that's basically what you do. Do the math. So again, you're going to do P by S, P being your priority, the number that you have scored on your factor, S being the number that you give your solution based on the factor itself. So again, like 1 to 3 was what we were using before. Multiply them together, that is now your R. Add all the R's together. The one that is the lowest is the one that you should pick. And then you repeat this for every single one until you have your idea, until you have your decision made. So this is fun. This is cool. How do we make it better? I'm always about improving things. And again, it's good you can just like write this down and have an idea of using a decision matrix to make a decision, but these are some other things to kind of improve it if you want to make a more informed, evidence-based decision. So quantity is always helpful in terms of doing more. If you really wanted to cover your bases, you could add more factors, add more solutions. Adding factors isn't the most important because since you prioritize them anyway, it's not going to make much of a difference. You could do from scoring it from 1 to 10, but again, the one who's going to be the lowest is the one that's going to be the winner in the end. So doing more factors isn't going to change your answer that much, but it might make you feel more self-assured about the decision that you reach in the end. But quantity of solutions is always going to be really helpful. So the more solutions you have or choices you have could be really, really helpful. Some decisions that you have fixed sets of solutions, for example, local politics and candidates. So that's kind of outside of your control. But if you do have a decision that you're making that you can use more, that's always really helpful. Quality, so self-awareness, being able to make sure that the number that you score for your different factors is based upon research or just assurance. You don't necessarily have to do crazy amounts of research to make sure this politician did what they said they did, but if you feel self-assured and you are aware that the score that you've given them is right and it feels right, then that's enough. Passive inquiry is very much research again, just wanting to make sure that you try different things. So for example, you could look into a councillor's response time, or you could look into their voting records. But the more passive inquiry you have, the more set you're going to feel about having that research done and making that informed decision. And then the last one is looking for hybrid solutions. So for example, if there ever was an opportunity to pick two in your decision, then can you combine them in certain ways? So for example, using this, you could, with the first past vote system, you could understand, okay, well, who would be my second choice, who would be my third, et cetera, et cetera. So this again will be able to show you your scores, and it will also help you to pick a second choice rather than just a first. So that's always going to be helpful too. Cool. So that is basically it. That is how you do a decision matrix, and that is why you should use a decision matrix to make a decision. And again, you don't have to. If you are sure of who you want to vote for, cool. Go out, make sure you are registered to vote on this Monday, the 19th. Make sure you're voting. Local elections in England are on the 6th of May. And just make sure you're out there and getting that done, getting voted, getting registered. But if this was helpful for you and you weren't sure who to vote for, you weren't sure kind of how to make that decision, this is always just a really good way to kind of feel a bit more self-assured because you're using math, and math is foolproof. So always a good way. If anyone has any questions, then I'm going to open it up now for any questions or comments that people might have, both again from our webinar that's currently on, or from anyone who's watching on Facebook. Would love to hear your thoughts, your concerns, your questions. So I will leave it up for a few minutes. And then we will probably close the session early, about 15 minutes early. It usually is a little longer. That's when we have more participation. But yeah, with the webinar function on Zoom, it makes it hard to kind of have that back and forth. So we're going to close it at about 1:45. So if anyone has any questions, we've got about 5 more minutes that we can cover those questions in. I'm going to leave my fun graphic up because it's nicer than a Q&A, but yes. I'm just going to wait for a couple more minutes to see if anyone has any questions coming through. Oh, I can see one in the chat already. Okay, cool. So we have no questions on Facebook. No questions that I see in the webinar, so I will just end it early then. If you have any thoughts, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook and we will be able to kind of talk again. So I hope everybody learned something. I hope this was enjoyable. Like I said, mathematics can be fun. I love mathematics in general. It's always just a great vibe to have. Oh yes, no problem, Irina. So the passive inquiry. And I'm glad to hear you're writing everything down. That's great. So passive inquiry basically just means research. So for example, if we're taking like a local candidate, if we're using that example, it just means different kind of passive research. So for example, you could reach out to a local candidate and see how long they take to respond to you. See if, they will text you on Facebook, whether they text you on email, whether they answer their calls. That would show you, how good they are at communication. You could look into their voting records online and see what they voted for in the past. You could see what they say in their pledge, whether they have taken a pledge, whether they align with it. You could look into, past work experience, like you've talked about, and on their LinkedIn, see what they've stood for in the past, where they've worked in the past. Um, but basically, all these different things are different ways in which you can have more research and feel more informed. And that's what I mean by passive inquiry. So, not just looking up maybe a candidate's manifesto, but looking up all these different things as well to make you feel more informed. So those are the passive inquiry, basically. And like I said, the bit after that was on hybrid solutions, which is again seeing if you can combine them in any way. That doesn't necessarily work when you're voting, but it can also help you to understand who your second and third choices would be in terms of voting as well. So yes, thank you so much for coming, everybody. And I hope that you learned something, and I hope that this was helpful, especially to anyone out there who is unsure of who to vote for or unsure of how to make that kind of decision. It can always be great. Oh, we have more question coming in from Facebook. Yay, this is great. Love to hear it. So let's see. Just going to see the question. So policy trumps personality when deciding on a candidate. Very, very subjective, for some people, yes, for some people, no. It's completely up to you. And that's the whole point of this decision matrix. Everyone is going to be so different in terms of what factors they pick, and how they prioritize those factors. What's important to you is going to be very different to what's important to somebody else. And that's okay. The whole point of this is to have a very kind of personalized decision. So being able to be like, okay, for example, policy is really, really important to me. And being able to have that as your number one priority. Cool. Go look into their policies and see what they stand for and see what they care about. Another person could say that the personality is really, really important to them, and they don't really care what they do in terms of policies, but they do care with, how engaging they are, whether or not they'll meet up with you for a coffee to talk about what's happening in your local area, which again, for a local councillor, super, super important. It might be really helpful to have a personality that you feel you can engage with, contact and, feel supported by, especially in local politics. So that for somebody could be much more important than a policy, but for other people it isn't. So again, it's very subjective, it's very personal, it's down to whatever you as a person care about. And again, that's the whole point of this matrix, is that it shows you what you care about. Sometimes you don't even know until you sit down and you brainstorm those 10 things. And the very method of prioritizing shows you what you care about the most. And you may not have known that, maybe you care about policy more, or maybe you care about personality more, until you sit down and actually start to prioritize those things that you care about. So that in itself is a very kind of, again, subjective thing, but using a tool such as a decision matrix, or even just sitting down and thinking about it, can really help figure out what your preferred features are and factors are, and the things that you care about in terms of voting. And then once you know that, it's going to make your decision of who to vote for a lot easier to make, because you know why you're voting. Great question though, really, really good question. Any other questions coming in? We'll give it a couple more minutes. I understand that I talk quite fast and breeze through things, so I do want to be able to pause just in case people are typing or thinking. But also thank you everybody for watching and coming. I know, Wednesday afternoon isn't always the easiest for everybody, but I hope that you learned something, and I hope that it was an interesting webinar, it's recorded. So anyone who's watching this at a later date, I hope it's helpful for you to make a decision. I encourage you to rewatch this on May 5th, the day before the election, to figure out what you want to do and who you want to vote for, because it can be super helpful. There's a lot going on right now with the pandemic and with everything. That mental strain of having yet another decision to make can be really hard. So having a tool that kind of does the work for you can actually be really helpful in terms of mental health too. So that's another reason I like using these kind of tools. So another question that we have is, which party is better to vote for? That's, again, completely up to you. The whole point of this is to figure out what you care about. Like I said before, voting is so subjective. It's a very personal thing. Who I vote for, who my colleagues vote for, who my friends, who my family vote for could be the same, could be different. It doesn't matter. Here at the 3 million, we always encourage people to get involved and to register and to vote. We're apolitical, so we don't, encourage a particular party. We just encourage people to get out, use their voice, and make sure that they're getting engaged. And you vote for whoever you want to vote for. And if you don't know which party is better to vote for, do the research. Again, that's the whole point of this, being able to understand what you care about, and then research each party and see whether they align with what you care about. And that's how you'll know which party is better to vote for. So, good question. I can't tell you that. Only you can figure that out, because it's going to be different based on who you are as a person and what you care about, in terms of your factors. If you don't know what those are, then using a decision matrix is always a great tool to be able to do that. So I hope everyone is, I hope this helps everybody. And a side point, if anyone wants to learn more about this, I learned this from my university. My university didn't come up with decision matrix. They've been around for a very, very long time. But if you're interested in that, then reach out and we can help tell you more about what decision matrix are and things like that. But even if you just Google decision matrix Wikipedia, it'll come up. It'll tell you what to do. You can rewatch this video, maybe slow it down a little bit because I tend to talk fast. But it'll be helpful too. So any other questions? Gonna leave it open for a few more minutes, and then we will close it off because I realize that people are busy on a Wednesday afternoon. Give it a few more minutes just to see if you have any other questions. No, okay, I don't see any more questions coming through, so we will close it there. Again, thank you everybody so much for taking the time to come and learn how to make a decision today. I hope it was helpful. I hope you can use this in the future to release any anxiety that you might have had about decisions or voting. And yes, if you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out to the 3 million on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and we would be happy to help as well.